everyone. This is Brandy Manker from Quinsigamond Community College Hospitality Recreational Management Program. Our staff has been hard at work to give you a peek at some of the cooking they've been doing from home. Join us to watch. Matthew Sullivan, HRM's lab site supervisor, cook a meal for two. Pan-fried pork cutlets, roasted potatoes, green beans, and a pickled red cabbage. Rebecca King, lab site supervisor, bake bread from home. Finally, Catherine Kling-Norse, MPH, RDN, LD, Adjunct Faculty Nutrition Coordinator, is making an immune booster soup. All of the Bobby M's staff is looking forward to seeing all of you back at the Worcester Senior Center real soon.
Hey everyone, it's Matt from Quinsigamond Community College's Hospitality and Recreation Management Program. Tonight I'm going to cook for you one of my favorite dishes. It's pan-fried pork cutlets with a quick pickled red cabbage, slow roasted baby potatoes, and sauteed green beans. I'm going to take you step by step through making each portion of the dish, so please enjoy. The first recipe we're going to make this evening is a quick pickled cabbage. To start, I'm going to show you how we're going to slice our cabbage. So the first thing I did was I cut it into quarters to get it nice and flat, and then I'm going to take out the root end, and then I'm just going to carefully julienne the cabbage. We're going to make our pickling liquid, so we're going to start with our apple cider vinegar, sugar, and our salt. So we put it into a container that has a tight-fitting lid. We're going to close the lid, and we're going to give it a shake. We're going to take our liquid and our cabbage over to our sink. We're going to put our cabbage into a colander. And then we're going to pour our boiling water over our cabbage. So what this is going to do is this is going to help break down our cabbage so that it doesn't take as long to pickle. And then we're going to add our pickled cabbage to our mixture. And we're going to gently shake it all together till it's combined. Container. We're going to put our tight-fitting lid back on, give it a gentle shake, and let it sit for a half hour. And that'll be our quick pickled cabbage. The next recipe we're going to make this evening is a quick and easy Italian roasted potatoes. So I'm going to start with 1 pound of baby roasted baby potatoes. One of my favorite seasoning mixes is Good Season's Italian salad dressing mix. So just tear open the package, pour it over our potatoes, and then to that we're just going to add a 1/4 cup of olive oil. We're going to toss that together, and then we're going to put it on our tinfoil lined sheet pan and bake it in the 400-degree oven for 45 minutes. So once we get our potatoes onto our pan, we're going to put it into a 400-degree oven for 45 minutes. So now that our potatoes are done, we're going to check them. So we want to make sure that they're fork tender. So I'm just going to take a fork, make sure that the fork goes in and they come out fairly easily. So now that they're done, I'm just going to leave them in our off oven to hold until the rest of our meal is ready. The recipe we're going to work on
is sauteed green beans. But before we can saute them, we're going to start by blanching them. So here I've got a pot of boiling water that's been salted. Should taste somewhat like the ocean. And I've got my snipped green beans. I'm just going to add them to the pot and cook them until they're almost done. So I want to make sure I cover the pot back up because I want that water to come back up to a boil as fast as possible to help keep that bright green color.
It's been cooking 3 to 5 minutes. I'm going to shut off our heat, and we're going to drain our green beans. And then I'm going to run some cold water over the top to stop the cooking process. This is going to allow us to keep our green beans from becoming overcooked.
It's melted. We're going to add our green beans to the hot pan. Careful not to add all the extra water that dripped off from the pan. We're going to let our green beans start to cook.
Halfway cooked, we're going to add our garlic. And we're going to want to make sure we are careful not to burn our garlic, because burnt garlic will be bitter garlic. We'll also season it with our salt and our pepper. And I like to personally use Himalayan pink salt.
So now that our garlic is just about done, we're going to see it starting to pick up a golden brown color. We're going to take them out of our pan and putting them into our serving vessel. We want to make sure that we get all that butter and all that garlic as best we can in there. Alright, so the first step for our pork is we're going to combine our dry ingredients to set up our 3-station breading station so that we can use our wet hand, dry hand method. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab a small casserole dish. We're going to add our flour, our salt, our pepper, and our onion powder. And we're just going to give that a gentle mix to make sure that all of our spices are mixed into our flour. Our next step is going to be, we're going to scramble our eggs and our milk. So I'm going to pour our milk into the bowl. And I'm going to crack our eggs. And then using our same whisk, I'm just going to carefully mix our eggs. For our breading. And once our eggs are mixed, we're going to pour it into our dish. If there's any parts that were just left around, just mix them in. Our last step is we're going to combine our breadcrumbs and our seasoning for our breading. So I personally like to use a mixture of panko breadcrumbs, which are larger and chunkier, Italian seasoning, and then a little bit of dry parsley, and Parmesan cheese. And then I'm going to mix them together. One of the tricks to getting your breading to stay on your meat is we're going to start by drying off our pork with paper towels. What this is going to do is it's going to absorb any of the extra liquid, as you can see, which will help our flour mixture stick a little bit better. So then we're going to go flour and make sure that we get it all coated up nice and with our flour. Using our dry hand into our liquid, we're then going to use our wet hand. And then finally, taking it out with our wet hand into our dry. where we're going to coat it with our breadcrumbs. We're going to repeat this process again with our other pork chop. I want to make sure to be pressing in the crumbs as best I can so that we make sure we have a nice even coat. I'm going to shake off the extra and place it on a clean plate to transfer it to where we're going to do our cooking. Now that our pan is hot, we're going to start pan frying our pork. So I'm going to use some olive oil, and I'm going to add just enough in the pan to come up about halfway up our pork. And then I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of butter, which is going to help give it that nice flavor. So once our butter is melted, we'll add in our pork. And what we're going to do is we're going to cook it on one side till it's golden brown, flip it over, cook it again until it's golden brown, and then we're going to check it to make sure that it's done to 145. So we're going to want to make sure that we're using either our hands or a clean set of tongs. And we're going to put our pork cutlet in. And if they both don't fit, then we'll have to do them one at a time. We want to prevent our pan from being overcrowded. So then we're going to check and make sure our cutlets are golden brown. And once they're golden brown, we're just going to flip them over. Once they're golden brown on both sides, we're going to pull them out of the pan, set them down, and let them rest for a couple minutes before we serve them. So the last step is we're going to put our plate together. So we're going to take our pork chop, some of our potatoes, our green beans, and then a pinch of our pickled cabbage. And there you have it.
Hi, my name is Rebecca King, and I'm a culinary instructor at Quinsigamond Community College in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I just wanted to reach out to people and see if I can share some tips and techniques for making your own bread. In these times when many of us are trying to work from home or we're staying home for safety during the COVID-19 crisis, I wanted to share some techniques for making your own bread. During this time, it may be hard for us to get out to the store, or we're hesitant to go out to the store because of the safety concerns, as well as going to the store and maybe the bread is not available, or it's in short supply, or the kind that you like is not there, or something that meets your nutritional needs. So one of the things that I wanted to share was how to make your own bread from your home that is quick and easy. So even though I've been cooking for years, a lot of years, I was always kind of intimidated by making bread. But I found myself going to the store and looking in the bread aisles, and I found there was a lot of breads that had a lot of ingredients that didn't seem to be necessary, ingredients I couldn't pronounce, some ingredients I couldn't have. So I started making my own bread from home. And I got this book. This is the Bread Lover's Bread Machine Cookbook, which tells you how you can make your bread at home with the use of a bread machine. I was never a huge fan of bread in a bread machine. I didn't like how it cooked. I didn't always like that it was overdone or underdone or had too much crust or not enough crust. Then you have these awkward holes in there from where the kneading parts have worked through the bread. But I found with this book, it actually gives you the full dough to preparation to bake in the bread machine, but it also gives you a dough-only process. And that's the process that I like to do. So what I can do is I can actually make my dough, have it knead, rise, and all that hard stuff that maybe we don't have the time to do because we have families or children. So that gets done in the machine, and it'll do its first rising process in the machine. Once that is over, the machine will beep, and I'll be able to take my dough out, put it into a pan, shape it into rolls, braid it, anything that I want to do to the dough, I can do at that point, and then I will let it do its second rise, and then I can bake it in the oven, and then I can have it the doneness that I want, the crust that I want, or however I desire. The great thing about the book is it does have pretty much everything from basic breads all the way up to artesian breads, whole grain breads, nut breads, quick breads, pizza doughs. So there's a lot of really fun things to do in the book that are quick and easy for those of us that might have busy lives, but we can have a product that we have control over and that we can do at any time. This book can be found on Amazon or many of the other online outlets. I happen to get mine from Amazon. So the next thing we're going to talk about is measurements. Some people don't like to bake, and one of the reasons why they don't like to bake is sometimes their stuff doesn't always come out the same. Maybe you used a mother's recipe or grandmother's recipe or a friend's recipe and you really liked it and you got it home and you made it and you were so excited and it didn't come out the same. One of the reasons why that tends to happen is because of measurements. Baking can be very subjective, and a lot of people don't realize that it's a chemistry. It really comes down to chemistry. So if we don't have the right measurement of ingredients, oftentimes our product doesn't come out. So part of proper measurement is that we need to have the right things to measure. So with baking, that's especially important that we have the right things to measure. So this is a dry measuring cup. Okay, so these are the dry measuring cups that you're going to use for baking. So this is anything that's flour, sugar, salts, anything like that you're going to do for a dry ingredient, you're going to use a dry measuring cup. And the reason why we need a dry measuring cup is we need to be able to level it off. So a lot of times I'll just use like the back of a knife. So if you take a back of a knife, you should be able to level off a cup. And what that does is it gives you an exact and precise measurement. You can also use a straight spatula. So if you have something like this at home, you can do the same thing and you're going to level that product off. So this happens to be 1/3 of a cup. And then I have it doesn't really matter style or size. I have a couple different styles of size, the plastic or metal, doesn't matter as long as it's a dry measuring cup that we can level off, so we get those exact measurements. Okay, same thing will happen for your measuring spoons. So these are measuring spoons. Measuring spoons come in metal, plastic, doesn't matter, as long as it's a spoon that we can measure and that we can do that leveling off process. These are suitable spoons for baking. Okay, for our liquid ingredients, we want to make sure we use liquid measuring cups. And what that is, it'll give us our measurements for our liquids. So this would be for our water, any water, milk, honey, anything like that, oil, any of those liquid ingredients, we're going to use that. We even have little cups like this I have that will actually measure up to 4 tablespoons of liquid, which is nice. So when you have a large amount of tablespoons, and you can just kind of keep measuring them in one constant measurement instead of doing multiple attempts with a set of measuring spoons. So, okay, so now I'm going to show you how to measure. So I've already measured my 3 cups of flour that I have here, and then I have 3/4 cups remaining. So I'm taking my 1/2 cup. And I'm going to measure that here in my 1/2 cup, and I'm going to level it off with my knife, just like that. I'm going to level it off at the back of the knife, and I've got my 1/2 cup here. So next I'm going to do my 1/4 cup, so it's going to get me to my 3/4 cup of flour. So yet again, got my cup, taking the back of my knife, and I'll level this out flat. Okay, I'm going to add my last 1/4 cup to my bowl. So I now have my 3 3/4 cups of flour. So I'm going to put my flour aside. So the next thing that I need is going to be my yeast. Okay, so yeast, I keep my yeast in my storage container. Okay. I have an airtight container that I keep it in, and I use that and I put it in the fridge. When I'm all done, you can put it in the freezer if you don't use it quite as often. The freezer, it can be up to a year in the freezer with our yeast. So I need 2 1/4 So same thing as our cups. I'm going to dip it in here. We're going to level it off with the back of that knife. Yeast is extremely important because we're going to make sure that we get enough yeast, because if we don't have enough yeast, then our bread won't rise properly. If we have too much yeast, then it's not going to have the right texture that you need. So there's my 2¼ teaspoons of yeast. And so that is how to measure with the spoons, as well as how to measure with the cup. So my next dry ingredient that I'm going to measure is going to be my salt. Okay, salt, when it comes to baking, has a lot of components. It's not just about the saltiness. Salt actually lends a lot of the chemistry that we need for things to rise, taste, texture, all of those things that happen. So because I'm measuring salt out of a container like this, I'm going to want to put it over something to measure. And yet again, we're going to do that same leveling off process that we did with the flour and that we did with our yeast. Now, the important thing about salt is that we need to use the right salt. Okay, so this is just a regular table salt. If you have something like sea salt at home, you're going to want to make sure that you use a fine-grained sea salt for baking. Sea salt is perfectly fine for baking, but we want to make sure we're using a fine-grained sea salt because a coarse-grained salt is not going to disperse through your product during the baking process. So we want to make sure we're using that fine granulated table salt, or we're going to use fine granulated sea salt. So our next step is going to be loading our ingredients into the bread machine, and I've chosen to do the honey white bread. And as you can see, it comes with a 1½ pound loaf and a 2-pound loaf, and I've chosen to do the 2-pound loaf. So we're going to go over to our ingredients. So we have our measuring tools that we used, okay, and then we've got our wet ingredients, and then we have what are called our dry ingredients. Every bread machine, and I'll include a graphic in that, has a loading recommendation for the ingredients and how they get loaded in. So which one goes in first, which one goes in second, which one goes in third. So I have this style of bread machine, and for this style of bread machine, we are going to load our yeast first. So our yeast is right here, so we're going to load our yeast in first. And actually, before I load my ingredients, I like to spray my pan down a little bit. Certainly important if you're going to bake. If you're not going to bake, it's good as well because it keeps your dough from sticking. And I usually just use some regular cooking spray, where you just give it a good spray, and you can see those little arms in there are what's going to help knead our bread. Okay, so now I'm going to add our yeast. I'm going to sprinkle that down in there. So the next ingredients that we have for our recipe is going to be our dry ingredients. So we're going to add that flour in there. Okay, and make sure you get all your flour. Okay, we're going to add Vital Wheat gluten, and I'll go over that in a minute as to what that does. And then we're going to add our salt. So lastly, in this particular bread machine, we're going to add our wet ingredients. And for this one, we have milk. We have canola oil. We have honey. I'll let that honey run on down in there. And you notice this recipe doesn't have sugar because our honey is going to replace our sugar as our kind of our sweetened ingredient here. Okay, lastly is going to be one of our most important things, which is our water. Okay, in water you want to have roughly lukewarm water between 75 and 100 degrees. I usually like mine right about 80, and as you can see, I'm right about 80 degrees. Okay, so my water is perfect. So I'm going to take my water out, and I'm going to put my water in my machine. Okay, and the water temperature is most important because yeast usually likes environments between 75 and 100 degrees. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to program our machine, and right now our machine is wanting to bake. You can see where it says 330, and then it's got medium, light, and dark. Okay, that's the crust level that you want if you want your bread baked lightly, medium, or on the darker side. We also have a basic bread, a quick bread, a wheat bread, or just a dough. You can also do a jam, cake, and sandwich, and homemade. Okay, so these are just some other options here. In your crust control, you can just hit this button, and it'll beep down between light, medium, and dark. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to select our course. And when we select our course, you can see the arrow move along. And we want it on dough. And it's going to take about 1 hour and 50 minutes for our dough to mix, incorporate all our ingredients, and then to do our first rise. Okay, once our first rise is done, it's going to punch it down, which means the machine's going to kick back on. It's going to knead that dough, and then it's going to beep that it is done and is ready for its second rise, and then we can bake it. So we're going to hit start when we're done here, and you can see it says that it's preheating because we do need some heat in order to get our bread to rise. So now that we have our dough in our machine and it's ready to go, I'm going to go over some of the ingredients that I used. So the first thing that we used is our flour. And in this case, most of these recipes will call for bread flour. Okay, and I personally like to use the King Arthur flour. That's one of my favorite flours to use. It's local. It's a really good baking flour. Easily ordered online, especially in these times. And they do have it in most of the local supermarkets. So as we talked about before, we have just our regular table salt. And just a reminder, you want to use the fine grain salt, whether it's sea salt or table salt. Then we have our yeast. So the book will tell you to get the SAF instant yeast. Okay, and that's what I have here. And there's a bag here of how it came. And like I said, I keep it into this airtight container that pops open. It has a vacuum seal on it. We shut it, hit the button, and it has a tight seal. Keep it in the fridge or the freezer. Okay, then we also have some, if you have just packets of yeast, we have active dry yeast, which can also be used. Yet again, keep those in the refrigerator or the freezer for long storage. So we have the honey that we used, which is our sweetener, so no sugar, just honey in this bread. Our canola oil, so just a pure canola oil that we used. So this book also uses something called Vital Wheat Gluten. Okay, yet again, this can be available in the store. I think Bob's Red Mill has a version. And then this is the King Arthur version of the Vital Wheat Gluten. And what the Vital Wheat Gluten does is it gives a texture to the bread, gives us that nice, soft, chewy texture, which kind of gives your bread some life and some body. And so for most of the recipes in this book, it does call for the Vital Wheat Gluten. And in this recipe, we used the 1.5 tablespoons. So the next thing we have is just the canola spray that we use to spray the pan prior to putting the dough in so our dough doesn't stick. And then we also had our milk. In my case, my family doesn't do regular milk, so I've substituted lactate milk. You can substitute any other unsweetened milk other than dairy milk, or you could just use dairy milk as well. Some of the recipes also call for non-fat dry milk. This particular one called for a liquid. So our unit has preheated, and it's now in the. See where it says kneading. Okay, and you can hear the machine working. We go up to this little window. You can actually see our dough working through the window. These machines are built with a safety procedure, so if you open the machine, it does stop kneading, but you can see the product, and it's kneading all those ingredients together. So our 1 hour and 50 minutes has gone. It's going to be complete after the 1 hour and 50. Complete after the dough is in here. It's gone through its first rise, and the machine is actually taking care of punching it. Down. Low ball. As you can see, when we reach down to take out the dough, pretty much comes out pretty clean, and that was because we sprayed it ahead of time. any dry product in there because it mixed really well. And then we have our clean pan and all our dough is remaining. Go over some pans. So we've got a non-stick loaf pan, and then I've also got a stoneware pan, and then lastly we have a metal pan that has a cover. So today I'm going to make this a sandwich bread. So I'm going to bake my bread in here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to spray our pan very well. So we're going to get that cooking spray yet again that we used, the same one that we used beforehand. And whether you're doing this in a bowl to rise or a pan to rise, it doesn't matter. You always want to make sure you spray the pan really well. So in this case, I'm going to slide my cover off, and we're going to be able to spray this down pretty well and finish spraying our side. Okay, what this is going to do is going to allow the bread to rise, and then it's not going to stick to the pan. And then when you're done baking your bread, you'll be able to get it out of the pan fairly easily. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work our dough into a nice ball, and we're going to nestle it into the pan. So we have our bread all in our dough, and I have it squished down into our pan. We have our lid cover sprayed. So now I'm going to attach our lid, and this just slides right onto the pan. Okay, and I'm going to close this and let it rise. And we want to let it rise in room temperature for at least an hour. So our bread's going to sit in our pan. It's going to sit in the pan for about an hour at room temperature. We want it to be at room temperature and draft free. If you're not using a pan with a cover like this and you're using an open size pan, or if you're rising it into a bowl, you would want to make sure you have it in the same room temperature, and you want to have it draft free, and you want to have it covered with either plastic wrap or a towel. So our bread's been rising, wrap or a towel. So our bread's been rising for about an hour and a half at room temperature. You're looking for double in size. So we're ready to shut the lid and put it in the oven. We're going to put it on 375 for 20 to 30 minutes. So our bread baked for 375 degrees for about 30 minutes, and you can see it's nice and brown, and we have a little blonde on the edges. And then we can just take our lid and we're going to slide it off. And then we're going to take our pot holders and flip it over onto a board. And we have a sandwich loaf.
Hi everyone, Catherine Nurse here, coming to you from my very own kitchen instead of the one at the Worcester Senior Center as part of the Hospitality and Recreation Management team. I'm the nutrition instructor, and I'm pleased to share with you today my recipe for success during this COVID crisis, the Immune Booster Soup. So let's go ahead and check in with the recipe.
I created this soup last month when I was tasked with cleaning out my pantry and my freezer, trying to minimize trips to the grocery store, practicing social distancing, and looking for those immune system boosting foods. Foods that have nutrients like beta-carotene, zinc, protein, and vitamin C. This soup provides a nice plant-forward base of kale, carrots, cannellini beans, tomatoes, onion, and celery, and features things that are most readily found this time of year. It's got nice color, and we sauteed all of our vegetables in extra virgin olive oil, which is known for its heart health, and seasoned it with garlic, salt, and pepper. Feel free to be creative with your spices and herbs, depending on what your flavor preference might be.
Now is the best part, the eating. Let's give it a taste. Delicious. Thanks again for joining me today. Catherine Nurse, QCC HRM Nutrition Instructor, as we talked about our recipes for success during this COVID-19 crisis. We talked about the importance of micronutrients and the role that they play in boosting our immune system, and we showcased different foods that contain these nutrients in the recipe for our immune booster soup. I hope you enjoy yours when you make it at home. Drop me a line, let me know how it goes, and again, hoping that you will eat well to be well.